Talking about funding, the voices calling for a universal basic income grant have been getting louder and louder in South Africa. There is something akin to a basic income grant, which is the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress grant of 350 Rand, which you'll recall was introduced and then withdrawn and reintroduced. But lobbyists are calling for a basic income grant that is more substantial and supports poor people without a job permanently. The Institute for Economic Justice has put forward a financing policy brief to discuss. We're joined by the co-founder and senior policy specialist at the Institute, Neil Coleman. Mr. Coleman, thank you for being with us. Do you agree with those who are saying that the writing is on the wall, and it does seem like as a nation we are heading towards a universal basic income grant? It's just now the amount that is the sticking point.
Good evening. Yes, I think we're definitely heading in that direction. And the simple reason is that the current reality that we're confronting in South Africa and globally, with the COVID crisis, with the economic crisis, with the climate crisis, and the disruptive impacts of new technologies, there is a need for a universal basic income, which is increasingly being recognized globally. So, yes, I mean, it's not a simple matter. There's still a lot of debate in government. We had a webinar today where the Department of Social Development was saying that government continues to discuss this matter, but clearly the COVID grant expires at the end of March next year. So by then, government is going to have to come up with a plan.
Yeah.
There's an expert panel which is about to release its recommendations on this issue. And what we have done is we have convened various international experts, South African researchers, and so on. And what's increasingly becoming clear is that the bogeyman around cost is actually frightening people unnecessarily. The cost of a grant is far less than would first appear when you factor in all the economic multiplier benefits and the other social benefits which such an income grant would introduce.
Well, can you say that you've really modeled this? Can you say if we support a basic income grant, this is what South Africa's debt trajectory will be, this is how it will change? And then can you say with certainty for South Africans, you will pay X amount more in tax?
There's nothing certain in life. You know, what we can say is that these issues have been modeled by economists. The ADRS has run a model in which they project that the introduction of a basic income grant will not fundamentally change our debt or deficit trajectory. In fact, if we combine a basic income grant with other economic interventions which get our economy moving, the likelihood is that as we grow GDP, that our deficit and debt trajectory will stabilize rather than worsen, as is currently the case. So we've got to get out of this technocratic bean counting approach that every bit of money that is spent is somehow adding to the deficit, it's somehow increasing our debt. That's not the way economies work. Economies are not like households. They are dynamic organisms. And what the trials, the basic income grant trials around the world have shown is that as the multiplier effects of these grants kick in, you see the kick-starting of economic activity, and you also see all sorts of beneficial social impacts, such as reduction in crime, such as increase in school-going, reduction of malnutrition, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And these are incalculable, you know, so we've got to look at a broader political economy.
And what is interesting to me is that business people and economists of a certain bent who used to be accused of being pro-austerity are also supporting this grant, including your brother, who is a partner at Goldman Sachs, asking for even more. He told us earlier this week, 800 Rand, you're looking at 585. So there is this convergence, I think, across the economic spectrum. But in your paper, you do talk about tax tax implications, maybe going up by 3% more for the rich. Tell me if I'm correct there. And is there that risk, another bogeyman perhaps, or is it a real risk that people will leave? Wealth is fleeing South Africa, we know, and now you're looking at a tax rate heading to 50%. Won't that really be off-putting for some who could invest, who could stay in SA?
You know, by historical standards, tax, particularly on wealth in this country, is not very high. If you look at, you know, going back to the New Deal in the United States, to the post Second World War economic reconstruction, there was, you know, much higher taxes levied on the wealthy. So it's about, you know, what is regarded as being socially necessary and acceptable, and people believing that their taxes are going to go to a useful and productive outlet, rather than those taxes just going down a black hole. And I think one of the things increasingly in society, a consensus is emerging, is that getting income directly into the hands of the poor is the most productive use of income, because there's no middleman. The income goes directly to people. They spend it in the most appropriate way in their communities, and it generates all these economic multipliers. This is what the international evidence shows. And we had an input today at a webinar we convened, in which an international consultancy called Development Pathways looked at 8 lower income and middle income countries, and they modeled what the impact is of a grant. And they show that the multipliers, in other words, the economic spin-offs, the added benefits to those countries are massive in terms of additional revenue, in terms of economic activity, in terms of employment, and most importantly, in terms of reducing poverty. But the big and basic income can never be a silver bullet. It can't resolve all issues. It has to be combined with a range of economic interventions. Its great advantage, though, is that it can be rolled out immediately in the short term. Whatever criticisms we have of SASA and DSD, what is true is that they have rolled out nearly 8 million grants to the poorest in this country, and have done that in a very, very short time. That is a massive achievement, and is, if you look at other mechanisms such as job creation, infrastructure, other programs, while important, their ability in the short term to reach the poorest in the country is not there. That's a medium-term program.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much. Neil Coleman, co-founder and senior policy specialist at the Institute of Economic Justice.